Okay, well, hello all, friends of Midwest Mountaineering. It's good to be with you today. This is Cliff Jacobson. Let me begin by saying this is my first ever Zoom presentation like this. So naturally, I am a little hopeful, or more than a little hopeful, that everything will be okay. And so, welcome aboard. And today we're going to do a show on canoeing wild rivers from my flagship, Canoeing Wild Rivers. And everything that I'm going to talk about today is in that book, plus a whole lot more. So, before we get started, let me just make a few comments. I pretty much put most of my Canadian canoeing to rest now. You know, I turned 80 years old this year, and I still do a lot of canoeing and camping, but I can't do those big mean portages anymore. But I'm still out there doing this stuff. Earlier this year in the fall, we did 150 miles on the Jacks Fork and Current rivers in solo canoes. And we just got off doing the upper Missouri River, which was about 150 miles. In fact, we just made it because we made it 2 days before the snow and the ice hit. And coming up this spring, I have the Buffalo River again in Arkansas, one of my favorite rivers. And in the fall, I'm going to do the Rio Grande, again, the lower canyons this time. So I'm still doing this stuff, and it's still in my blood, and I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can. So if I may, I would like to just how do I change to the next? This thing isn't, what? Oh, there we go. Okay. I want to just say a few words, if I may, about my not little kids book, my teen book, Justin Cody's Race to Survival. You know, I wrote this a couple of years ago because I was tired of seeing all these gray hairs out in the wilderness, and I wanted to try to figure a way to get young people involved. So I decided to do something really different, write a novel, an adventure novel that would drag them in, a survival adventure novel that will drag them in, but teach them wilderness canoeing and camping skills along the way. So if you have a a tween, or a young person, and you want to teach them some skills and keep them interested, check out my book. Okay, see my website, cliffcanoe.com, if you have any questions. I do a blog on it every month, and there's a whole bunch up there. You may find them enjoyable, and you can email me at any time at info@cliffcanoe.com. And before we actually get into the show, let me say that Don is standing by for any of you that want to ask any questions. He'll relay those questions to me, and we'll talk about them on the show here today. So let's get started. One of the first things that I get from people, they say to me, Cliff, why do you canoe these wild rivers when there's so much beauty close to home? They'll say, like, are those areas really more beautiful than, say, the Boundary Waters canoe area? And the answer is yes and no. Some of the places I've been in the far north are prettier than anything I've seen in the Boundary Waters. As a whole, though, I would say probably the Boundary Waters is about as pretty a place that you're going to find. When you canoe many of the northern rivers, there are days where it's just not very pretty at all. So then why spend all this money and all this time to go up north to do a wild river? And the answer lies in, it's not just a wilderness experience. It's more than a wilderness experience. You rub shoulders with bush pilots and native people. So it's as much of a social experience as it is a wilderness experience. And of course, it's terribly remote, which means that you're not going to run into people. You can camp where you want. You can build a fire where you want. You don't need special permits and so forth. So that's really one of the major reasons why I do this. Getting there is part of the journey. You get to fly on these old egg beater airplanes, like this old single otter. Some of these planes date back to the 1940s. A few of them crash every year, and when they're gone, they're gone. Actually, I've flown on this airplane several times. This is a Transwest Air flight. This is a twin otter. And this is the king of the bush planes as far as I'm concerned. I just love these airplanes. So you get a chance to fly on these things, and you get a chance to meet local people. For example, this man here, he's an Inuit from Arviat, which is on Hudson Bay. And there's actually a little interesting story to this. We ended a trip on the North Knife River, right at Hudson Bay. And then from there, we had to get to Arviat, which was about, if I recall, maybe 60 miles away. So we chartered his boat. Now, and we put the canoes on the boat, as you can see here. And then as he's going along, he gets a radio, the radio comes on and hits his brother-in-law. And his brother-in-law is talking to him in Inuktitut, which is a beautiful lyrical language. Sounds a little bit like Hawaiian. And it seems that his brother-in-law has a whale, a beluga whale, that has been that's been sort of trapped in a little bay, and he wants his brother to help him get it. Now, you know, whaling, eating whale is part of the Inuit way of life. And it was kind of interesting because I'm watching the expression on other people's face as he's driving over there. Some people understand that this is part of their way of life. Other people don't realize these people can't just pick up and go to a supermarket and get their food like we can here. To make a long story short, they get the whale, they haul the whale aboard, and literally that whale is taken apart in, I'd say, a minute and a half. Butchered, taken apart in a minute and a half. And so these are part of the things, some of the things that you get to experience when you do trips like this. Excuse me. You get your own private waterfalls. Yeah, I know that some people go to Niagara Falls and they think it's the most beautiful sight they've ever seen. I've been to Niagara several times and it is a beautiful falls. But when I go there, it's not my falls. It's everybody else's falls too. So there's a lot of people. This happens to be Manitou Falls on the Fond du Lac River, falls I've ever seen, because the river comes, it's really interesting. The river comes in from the right, makes a hard left turn, and then goes back out to the left again. This is Wilberforce Falls. Right here, this is where Sue Herrings and I were married, at the top of this falls. Wilberforce is the highest falls north of the Arctic Circle. Getting around this is a 3-mile portage across the tundra, going all the way around into Bathurst Inlet. So these are some of the things you get to see. And of course, you get to portage around these things. This is, like I say, this is a 3-mile portage on the tundra. The wildlife is also phenomenal. There have been several trips where there have been so many caribou. We were into caribou all day long. They're walking through our camps. They make no noise whatsoever except a curious little clickety click of their heels. They went through our camp at night. They step over guy lines. They're amazing animals. And they swim. I remember we were paddling along. There were hundreds, possibly thousands of them in the water, swimming along by our canoe, stroke their backs with our paddles. So these are some of the things we get to see. Muskox, yeah, you get to see them too. And you need to be a little careful around them. They can be a little nasty if you're not real careful, but generally they're pretty timid animals. There's actually a huge story that goes along with this photo. On my first trip on the Hood River, this was back in 1983, I believe. One of the guys, Rev Bowman, was sneaking up on this muskox trying to take a picture. And there's sort of this thing with wilderness canoeists, you know, he who gets the best muskox picture wins. Well, Rob Bowman, he got within about, I would say, 6 feet of this bull, and he's down in a little depression, and the bull is just looking at him. And as soon as he snaps the picture, now these are the old camera days, you hear the click. he started pawing the ground, and he snorted so much that it clouded Reb's glasses. This freaked Reb out. He stood up and screamed, turned around, started running in the opposite direction of the bull. The bull freaked out, spun around, and started running as fast as he could. So here they were, running as fast as they could in opposite directions across the tundra. It was pretty funny. And of course, there's this guy. I've seen a lot of bears. This guy is actually a grizzly, and he is, this is the Fond du Lac River, not far from the Northwest Territories. He was one of many bears that has been in our camp over the years. Fortunately, I've always had good luck with bears. I've had a lot of encounters with black bears, grizzlies, about a dozen polar bears. I've never had to hurt a bear. This guy, followed us for quite a while. It was a pretty scary thing. And one of the things that I tell people is don't get too close to these animals. Don't get in their face because it can be problematic. We're paddling down the river. This was the North Knife again, which is in Manitoba. And there was a mama bear and a baby on the river left. And one of the guys in the canoe got too close to it. He wanted to take their picture. The minute he got too close, he got into her comfort zone. She and the cub jumped in the water, started chasing the canoe across the river. We all went across the river. And as soon as we got there, we saw the bear coming. We went back across the river left. The bear went back across the river left. We went back across the river right. The bear started going across the river right. And then by that time, we had another problem. My wife, Susie, had to go to the bathroom, and I made a big mistake. We were on River Right, standing on a hill, all of us together. And I said, well, go upstream. I should have said, go downstream. What happened was the bear came up, and Susie was caught between the bear and us. She started running towards us, and the polar bear started loping after her. At which point we fired a shot, put a slug just below the bear, to the right of the bear. She stopped, she looked up, didn't understand what was going on. And then I talked to her. I know this sounds goofy. Yep, I did. I talked to her, and ultimately she returned to the river. She didn't go away. She followed us downstream for the next few miles. At this point, we were about 10 miles from Hudson Bay. The fishing is literally phenomenal. This is Bathurst Inlet. Many times we've had two fish on the same line. I could scream and yell about how wonderful the fishing is, but you would just have to actually be there to see it. And this is along the North Knife River also. This is almost a record brook trout, almost a record-sized brook trout. But you know what? It's not all about dangers and excitement doing these trips. There's time to relax and enjoy life. This picture was taken on the Snake River. You can see with the clouds moving in, we're pretty high at this point. There's really time to relax, enjoy, and kick back. So like I say, it's not all about dangers and excitement. Another great thing about these northern rivers is you get to meet a lot of interesting people and see a lot of historical sites. This is the town of Arviat. By the way, there's one place to stay in Arviat. It's right over here. This is the hotel. And this is the main street in town. This is about all there is. There's a few little other gravel streets in town. This Arviat is located about 100 miles from Churchill. So to go from Arviat to Churchill, you basically fly. You have to take a plane. So I had some leftover food from the trip. You can see it in that bag there. We just had some leftover food. So I gave it to this lady here. She was very gracious to receive it. And we're walking along, and I'm talking to her. I'm telling her about the trip. She's smiling at me and just smiling. And so it was after we went about 100 yards or so, I realized she didn't speak a word of English. She only spoke in Nuktatuk. But that was fine. We shared the dream. She was happy. She enjoyed walking with me, and she was very thankful. So these are part of the social experiences that you get. Here's another one. This is the wonderful story too. This was on the Snake River in the Yukon. We finished out on the Snake River and we were waiting for our pickup, which we wouldn't come till the next day. And these three Indian kids walked down, and we had brought some grass skirts and leis and things like that, just because we had one of the guys along who'd never been above the Arctic Circle. Okay. So here we are now at Fort McPherson. We're above the Arctic Circle. So we decided we were going to put these things on, dress up for a photograph, have a little fun. But when the kids came along, we said, hey, kids, can we dress you up? And they said, oh, yeah, yeah. So we put all this stuff on them and we took their picture and they were just thrilled. So what they did then is they went home and they told their mom. And then they came back about an hour later and they said, Mom has invited you guys all for dinner at our house and we're having caribou steak. So we all went to their house. We had caribou steak. It was just wonderful. And what was really cool about it was their mom said that her father said he always loved canoeists. He said, be kind to canoeists because they love the land. Welcome them. Well, her father had died some years ago, but she was doing just that for us. So this was a very special thing and one of the very special things about these northern trips. This is Nadlac. Nadlac is located along the Burnside River. We did this trip, I'm trying to remember, I think it was like 1986 or thereabouts. We were among the first groups to see this. Many, many years ago, about 10,000 years ago, a mini ice age went through here. And the Inuit people, since this was tundra, the way they had to build their houses, they would stack up tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of caribou bones. The caribou did a crossing right in through here. So they were right in line with a caribou crossing. And of course, caribou was their livelihood. So they would make sort of a rock circle base, and then they would build this thing up with caribou antlers. And then on top of the caribou antlers, they put caribou hides. Well, this had only been discovered, I think this had been discovered about 1982 or thereabouts. You can do some research and look up Nadlac, N-A-D-L-A-K, but hardly anybody had ever seen this. So this is another one of the great wonders of doing these northern trips. All right, enough of that. You don't have to go to Canada or Alaska to experience the excitement and remoteness. This is this is Lewis Lake, Yellowstone National Park. And we arrived literally, Susie and I did this in solo canoes. We arrived literally the next day after the ice went out. The ice went out the day before. And whoops, okay. As you can see, this is what camping's like when the ice goes out the day before. But we had a wonderful time in Yellowstone National Park. Not very many people do this. They, at least not in early June when there's still an awful lot of snow on the ground. This is one of my favorite rivers. This is an easy river. Anybody can do this river. There's no rapids at all, just current. This is the Little Missouri River in North Dakota. This was Teddy Roosevelt's favorite spot. In fact, if you look on the left side of the picture, you can see some posts over here. This was actually the site of Teddy Roosevelt's ranch that he had here. We sort of fell in love with this country. At first, I was poo-pooing North Dakota, like, oh, why do I want to go to North Dakota? What's in North Dakota? Well, what I found was, first of all, the people were just wonderful, literally wonderful, very, very welcoming and kind. Secondly, once we started down this river, we didn't see a soul. And you do have to have a map because you don't want to camp on private land. You want to camp within the park. It's a little problematic to do this trip. In the sense you have to have high water. How high? Real high. You want to do this trip right after a major storm. You basically can't have water that's too high to do this river. But if you do it, you will find it's not only very remote, but you will gain a lot of respect for North Dakota. It's a good prelude to doing an Arctic river. Why? Because you have to do it real early in the year, like March or April, you can get snow. It's cold. You don't have a lot of trees. It's like camping on the tundra, but it's a wonderful canoe trip. I would love to be able to do it again, but you got to hit it just right. This is a scene from that. This is me. I'm standing on a lump of coal. This is all coal, and this is what you see as you do the Little Missouri River. Now we're heading out west here. This is the Green River in Utah, and this is another trip that anybody can do. There's no rapids in this section of the Green, and you get to see some spectacular Anasazi ruins, great hiking, great canoeing. Same. Now we're on our way now. We're down to Texas. This is the Rio Grande. This is the upper Rio Grande, the very upper Rio Grande. And here's another shot from the upper Rio Grande. Here we are coming out through Santa Elena Canyon. Now the upper Rio Grande is suitable for high volume solo canoes, or relatively high volume solo canoes. These, if you're careful, you use these little ones we have here, and standard open canoes. You do need to keep your wits about you, depending on water levels. There's some dicey conditions, but the upper part can be done real easily in solo canoes. The lower part that goes through the canyon, I'm not going to say you can't use these boats, you sure can, but you better be a very good paddler. You're really better off with an inflatable canoe or a real high volume canoe, because there's a lot of big rapids in the lower Rio Grande. Now the Rio Grande, to me, this is my favorite U.S. river, and for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's basically the most remote river in the United States. You total out on this river, and you're looking around 80 to 100 miles of going through an area where everything bites or cuts, and getting you out would not be an easy thing. The camping is phenomenal, and of course there are no bugs. You probably will not see any people when you do the Rio Grande. If you do, it's fleeting. In the very upper part of the river, before you actually get into the park, this was interesting. This was an old movie set, which still is there. I think originally it was built for the movie. I think it was called either Durango or El Dorado. I think it was Durango. So that movie set is still there, and it's just kind of fun, seeing some of this stuff. Whoops. Okay. You get to meet local people too. We've met many Mexicans on our trip down the Rio Grande, and it's always a treat. I remember this guy here's on this beautiful horse on the other side of the river. My buddy Larry Rice speaks not fluent Spanish, but he's pretty good at it. He says, hola. He says, where do you live? He says, well, I live up in named a little town. He says that was about a mile or two back in. And so Larry says, do you have electricity there? He says, no electricity. He says, well, how do you get food? So he says, well, pickup truck comes in once a week with vegetables and stuff and food on the back. And that's what we do. We buy it there. And he says, then Larry says, have you got running water? And he goes, sí, Rio Grande. Okay. And then he says to me, you like cerveza, beer? He said, sí, no cerveza here. So he says, well, my little buddy, that's me, he says, we'll bring you a beer over. Would you like one? Oh, sí. So he says, are you married? Sí. He says, does your wife drink beer? Sí, but no cerveza here. He says, my little buddy will bring you two. So I brought him 2 beers over, and he was very, very thankful. So these are wonderful people, and they have a very, very hard life. This is now the lower Rio Grande, and here we are using soar boats. These are super high-end inflatable canoes. They're ideal for the lower part of the river because there's a lot of big rapids in the lower part. And here's what these swords look like. They're self-draining, so you can go through the biggest waves and they just drain right out. They're quite narrow, and they don't have a lot of room, so you got to plan accordingly, but they do handle very much like real canoes. And for those who would like to do a portion of the Rio Grande, there's a section that you can do that has no rapids at all. It's beautiful, and you can get an overnighter out of it. You start down here in the lower part of the map at Rio Grande Village, which is the central part of the park. Now, you can either use your own boats, or there's a rental. There's rental canoes, rental kayaks that you can get, and you canoe all the way up. You canoe through Boquillas Canyon. That's about 20 miles. This is beautiful, beautiful high canyon, but there's no rapids in it. And if you have an American passport, you can go to the little town of Boquillas, which is about here somewhere, and you can have a nice little lunch, margarita, whatever. And it's just a lot of fun. And then you can canoe over here. You can camp anywhere you want, even though it's a canyon. There's lots of places to set up tents. And then you get out all the way up over here let me, if I can move that out of the way so you can see it a little bit. You can get out at La Linda, okay? And you can get a pickup there, and you can come back to your car. So anyway, that's a trip that anybody. It's basically a 3-day trip. Basically, a 3-day trip, one overnighter in the middle. And just to show you that I'm not exaggerating, here are some people in sit-on-top kayaks that are doing this trip down to La Linda. Okay, and this is I just threw this picture in here. This the Mexicans used to be able to come across this bridge and go into the United States. But when the current administration came in, they shut this whole thing down. So now if they want to go to the States, and they do a lot, they come over to the States to shop. They come over to the States to do laundry because many of them don't have electricity or washing machines. This is closed off. My hope is that it will be opened again. It will be opened again soon. This is another one of my favorite rivers. This is the San Juan in Utah. Now, the San Juan sees a lot of traffic, mostly in rafts and kayaks. Canoes are like, what is a canoe? A solo canoe? I've never heard of them. I've never seen one. We did this trip in some canoes, and it was a lot of fun. The scenery is spectacular. It's got some real good cranking rapids in it. So you need to be a pretty good paddler. And if you're paddling a solo canoe, at least, you really need a full spray cover. But it's a marvelous trip. And this is just another scene from the San Juan. As you can see, spectacular wild river. This is an Alaskan river. This is the Noatak. Now, I've done the Noatak twice, and I put it in the slideshow because this is a river anybody can do. You don't need to be a whitewater junkie to do the Noatak. There's nothing in the Noatak that rates above low class 2. You don't need a spray cover to do the Noatak. And you don't have to portage because there are no portages. In fact, the Noatak, from the point that you can get on it, all the way to Kotzebue, Alaska, which is what, I'm trying to remember, about 300 miles, I think. There's not a single portage. This is one of the longest rivers that you can do without making a portage. That is a serious wilderness river. You will see muskox, you may see caribou, you will very likely see grizzly bears, and the fishing is phenomenal. Okay, here's some muskox along the Noatak. So this is another river that you can do. Now be aware, if you do an Alaskan river, you're going to have to either use a folding canoe or a raft, because they will not allow you to put hard canoes on the pontoons of float planes, of airplanes. The canoe or whatever you have is going to have to go inside the airplane. That means a folding canoe or a raft. This is one of my all-time favorites. We've done this river, what, 3 or 4 times now. We're going to do it again. We like it that well. It's a national wild and scenic river. This is the Buffalo in Arkansas. And the Buffalo in Arkansas is well within the capability of anybody who has good sense, can turn a canoe right or left and paddle backwards in a straight line. You can do the Buffalo. Some of you may be looking at the canoe in the foreground, okay? This one right here, you see the straps going across it, all right? That's because this canoe capsized in a rapid and literally split open, blew all the thwarts and seats. And so to hold it together, we had to put straps around it. Now, before some of you are thinking, well, gee, this might be too difficult for me, I want you to notice the seat in the back. You see that bucket seat in the back? This was paddled by a wacko Texan. And this is how they paddle in Texas. They load the boats up with hundreds of pounds of stuff, and then they sit in the back and think they can get them through big rapids. They will take no advice about paddling in the middle. They will take no advice about carrying less stuff. The net effect is they wreck their boats. In fact, with this particular paddler who we had along, this was not the first boat he wrecked going on trips with us. Actually, he wrecked two hard boats and damaged a third one, but he just never seemed to get the message. This is another picture of the Buffalo, just to give you an idea of what the river looks like. And this is a great family trip, I believe. Another view of the Buffalo, you can see the beautiful clear water of the river. And then one of the wonderful things about the Buffalo is the water quality is superb, and you can camp anywhere you want, and you can build open fires anywhere you want. There aren't very many rivers that you can still do that. The one thing you do have to watch out for on this river is flooding. If it rains, this river goes up and down like a yo-yo. This is a river I just got off of. This is the upper Missouri from Fort Benton to Kip State Park. It's a very easy river. A complete beginner can do this river, but don't sell it short, because you can get some very bad weather very, very quickly, and the wind can be in your face, and it can be tough sledding, if you will, if the wind's in your face. But it's extremely remote. Fun time. Another shot, same river, and another shot, same river. And as you go along, there are lots of little places like this that you can go and investigate. These places have been around for over 100 years. Part of the way these people made their living was they would cut firewood, they would put it along the bank of the river, and then when the steamboats came by, they would sell the firewood to the steamboats. So there's a lot of fun exploring and hiking. This is my favorite trip in the Boundary Waters, the Frost River. Runs out of Frost Lake. It goes ultimately into Little Saginaw Lake. I just love this route because it is so intimate and inviting. Now, one of the things that we always did when we did the Frost River, we would follow the main body of the river, not taking any of the portages, and it would take you down through this area in here. Well, I got to tell you, that's the most remote part of the Boundary Waters I've ever seen. In fact, when we started down this trip, we were all about over 65 when we did this. As we entered Frost Lake, one of the guys, there was a couple canoeists that were camped on Frost Lake, said, "Where are you going?" I said, "We're going down the Frost." And he says, "Ha ha." He says, "Toughest route in the BWCA." Well, when you come through this part, you know it. I would say if you're over 65 and you don't have some young bucks with you, you may not want to follow the main body of the river. You may instead want to take the portages and bypass this to go directly into Little Saginaw. I, this is interesting. There's a story in my book about courage. It's called Blind Courage. This is Renee Kuster and her husband, Ken Sobranek. It's a wonderful story written by my friend Larry Rice, who interviewed them. Renee is blind. She's totally 100% blind, yet she does these trips with Ken. And I said, have you ever tipped over? She said, oh yeah. I said, well, what happens if you capsize if you can't see? She said, well, I just hang on to my paddle. People know I've capsized and they rescue me. I said, well, how do you know what to do? She says, well, it's simple, really. She says, I always paddle bow. And if Ken says, draw, I draw. If he says, draw, I draw. Okay. But she has the courage to do this. It's just absolutely, she's wonderful, wonderful couple. Here they are on the Chippewa River. Okay. Same deal. Paddling this. This was class 3. These are class 3 rapids they're running. So blind courage. Yes, you need skill, but you also need some courage. In fact, I just want to relate to you an interesting little story about that. Some years ago, when I built my first solo canoe, I was practicing up in the Dells. This was on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border at Taylor Falls. And there's a kind of high water. It's a powerful class 2, maybe you could call it 2 plus a little bit rapid. So I'm playing around there, and they're having a qualifying event for national whitewater competition. And there was a young woman there. I still remember her name, Kristen Frisch. And she was paddling solo too, but she wanted to run the course. They had a course set up with gates there. And she said, I've been watching you, Cliff. She said, you know, you're pretty good. She said, would you take a run with me in my tandem canoe? I need a partner. I said, sure. So I went down this thing, and afterwards it was fun. She turned to me and she says, you know, Cliff, she says, you know, you're pretty good. You could be competitive. Why don't you enter this event? And I said to her, well, Kristen, to be honest with you, big rapids kind of like freak me out. No, I don't want it. So she looked me right in the eye and she said, you know, Cliff, you have more skill than you have guts. And I revere that, because that is exactly what's kept me out of trouble on these northern rivers. More skill than courage. My favorite rivers, this is in my book, Canoeing Wild Rivers. It was my very first solo trip in these little boats. This is in Ontario. And again, this trip is well within the capabilities of anybody you got to be decent with a solo canoe. You got to be able to handle class 2 rapids in a solo boat. If you can do that, you can do the Steel River. There is a trip guide available from the Ministry of Natural Resources. And this is one of the rapids on the Steel River. That's my friend Jim Mandel. And the boat he is paddling is an old Bell Flash Fire. This is the Florida Everglades. And I'd never done this before. It was an interesting learning curve for me, primarily because you camp on these chicky type things here. There's not much space. They're very, very small. And the tide comes up at night. And the tide is about a 5-foot tide. So you got to be careful your boat doesn't get caught underneath, underneath this structure when that tide comes up. So I would not do the Everglades again. I kind of got bored with it a bit, but I got to tell you, the navigation is challenging. You really need to have a navigational chart, and you're way smart if you have a GPS. Just another shot coming down through parts of the Everglades, and still another shot. That's my friend Larry Rice on the right. That's me, and that's an old Bell Wildfire on the left. And now I'm going to take you overseas. This is Norway, and this was an interesting experience to me too. I'm in a solo boat. We all paddle solo boats on this trip. These are folding canoes, and I'm just including these pictures just because some people think folding canoes are fragile. They are not. They actually run rapids better than hard boats. They're tough boats, and they're not very heavy. This is a 14-footer, and I believe it weighed 50 pounds. This is where we are now in Mexico, or in Chiapas, Mexico, near the border of Guatemala. This is the Rio Grande River. This picture is from my friend Larry Rice. So your question is, this is a shore boat. Your question is, did they make it? Answer, nope. Even soars have a limit. All right, and finally, this is a picture of Doug Green. Doug Green was 55 years old or something. He always wanted to paddle the Colorado River by himself, okay, through the Grand Canyon. Everybody thought he was crazy. He did it. His story's in my book. He's a very good paddler, not a great paddler, but very good paddler. But now he has courage. So, okay, I'm going to leave this now. I'm going to share some rules with you. If you decide you want to do one of these rivers. Now, these are Cliff's rules, okay? So anybody's free to disagree. And remember, you can call in questions anytime. Here we go. Let's start out with this. And my first rule is don't borrow anything from anybody for a canoe trip like this. Because if something happens, you're stuck with the bill, okay? Things break. This trailer broke on a trip to the Cree River in Canada, in Saskatchewan. And incredibly, I mean, this is incredible. We ran into a welder, a guy who come up to Saskatchewan to weld the floats of damaged float planes. He was stopped at a gas station a half a mile away. He was able to fix our trailer for us. And he was the only aluminum welder in Saskatchewan at the time. So things break, be prepared for that. I lost a brand new canoe on this. I had an Old Town Tripper with wood trim, went right through the side, went right through the frame. There was a frame bar, went here, cut the boat completely in half when the trailer flipped. Fortunately, when we got to La Ronge, Saskatchewan, which was our jumping off point, we managed to run into, would you believe, the Canadian rep for Mad River Canoes. Just happened to be in the grocery store. He took us back to his house and lent me a canoe for the trip. Strange things happen. Again, things can happen. This was my Mad River Explorer canoe, Kevlar, wrap this baby up. So and there's a moral here. Train your partner before you go. Now, what do I mean by train your partner? I'm not going to just say train him this stroke, this stroke. Train him or her exactly the same way every time. In other words, if your partner is paddling on the left and you want to go left, say your partner's in the bow paddling on the left, you yell draw and if you want him to go right, you yell cross draw. That's it. Draw, cross draw. Don't ever yell left, or right. Yep, that's what I did. And the lady in the front got confused, went the wrong way, and bingo, the boat was wrapped as fast as that. So when you train, be sure you use the same terminology exactly every time, because when stuff happens, people get flustered. Here's another example. This was along the Kopka River in Ontario, and this blue canoe had been there for some time. This old Jensen 18-footer, totally unsuitable canoe for a wilderness trip. So, you may be in love with fast, skinny canoes. I was for a long time, but taking them on a wilderness river is not a good place for them. You may be bringing them back in pieces in a suitcase. Okay. Use a ground cloth inside your canoe. I think this is inside your canoe, excuse me. I think inside stormproof your tent, okay, and use a plastic ground sheet inside your tent because water will get in. This happens, by the way, this picture was actually taken in the Boundary Waters. This is Ham Lake. It rained so hard, water went into the tent. And you can see here, I have a ground cloth on the inside. The ground cloth is bigger than the tent all around so that it flows off the sidewalls a bit. And yet you can see the entire floor is soaking wet. Now, I can't say enough good things about this. There's a lot of stories I could tell about how this saved my bacon. Probably the best one was many years ago when we were doing a trip in northern Manitoba, and the pilot let us off at the edge of a swamp. It was the only place he could land. So he said, I'll be back in about 2 hours. Well, as soon as he left, the storm came up. Pretty soon we got 4-foot waves on the lake. He's not coming back. What are we going to do? This was before satellite phones and GPSs and stuff like that. There was no way I could contact him. And we can't leave because, first of all, we got a storm out there with big waves. Secondly, if we go somewhere, he won't find us. We had to pitch these tents literally in a swamp. And I remember standing there, and as you stood there, water would slowly go over your boots, and then it would stop. We pitched our tents in this, put a ground cloth on the inside. We were stuck there for 2 days before that plane came back. Folks, it was like sleeping on a waterbed. Around you'd hear sloshing, but the water was trapped between the plastic and the floor, and we stayed dry. So anybody who tells you to put that ground cloth underneath the tent has just not, in my opinion, my estimation, not spent enough time in the bush in bad conditions. Okay. Yeah, stormproof your tents. This was a trip in Ontario. We had to chase this baby. There's no such thing as a self-supporting tent. Okay, you gotta stake them down. Now you want to make sure that you have enough extra stakes to do that. My rule is I bring 50% more stakes than what are called for. So when conditions are bad, I can stake down my tent. Bring tarps. These are twin tarps that I have here. Some of you may have seen my video, The Forgotten Skills. This is a cool arrangement. You can see that there's like a triangular opening in here. Now, if we built a fire right here, and then we backlogged it right here, what happens is the smoke will then go up like so, and right out through here, just like smoke on an Indian teepee. It's a pretty cool setup. Obviously, you can't do this probably in the boundary waters because your fire sites are set. But in the wilderness, in northern Canada, Alaska, where you're allowed to camp anywhere you want, you can set up a rig like this. It takes a bit of time, but it's pretty cool. This is the Everglades, and we are in one of Cook Custom Sewing leans. This is a lean 3. You can easily fit 4 or 5 people in this. It's got bug netting, and so this really makes it possible to cook, to do chores when the weather is really, really terrible. Another one of my favorite tarps, many years ago, Stan Cook, Cook Custom Sewing, Lakes, Minnesota, to make me a big, gigantic tarp with floating all around. This one is 15 feet by 15 feet, 15 square. And I carry 3 or 4 poles with, and you can see how this is set up. This is set up basically on the tundra. It's completely bug-free. And of course, all this netting makes it quite warm inside. It keeps the bugs out, and it keeps an awful lot of heat in. And when conditions are perfectly off, you just cram everybody in there and you can cook and you can pretty much enjoy life. Take maps seriously. There have been many, many cases where people have paddled over waterfalls or whatever the case might be because they're not taking maps seriously. When you get your maps, outline all the dangers, things like rapids, falls, portages, and so forth. And by the way, there's an interesting little short story in Canoeing Wild Rivers that I got from a friend of mine, Larry Rice. Larry said he went on a guided trip once, and how we won't mention who the person was who was guiding it. And this guy told everybody, leave your GPS at home. I have the full Canada topo maps. They're all plugged into my GPS. So save some weight, don't bring any maps. Well, obviously Larry thought this was absurd. And so he brought a set of maps with. And so every day people are crowding around the maps, looking at Larry's maps, where Larry could show them, this is what we did today, and this is where we're going tomorrow. The problem with GPS maps on your GPS is that, first of all, it's a battery operated thing. If the batteries fail, if you damage a thing, you don't have a GPS anymore. I have had one GPS die on a canoe trip. It can happen. You can capsize and lose it. You can get damaged, whatever. But even more than that, it's a tiny little screen the size of a big piece of bubble gum. And you can't really see what lies ahead or what was behind you very effectively when you're looking at a tiny little screen like this. So I don't know what trips this guy had guided, but my rule on maps is this. If I'm going with a crew of people, 3 maps. I have 2 sets myself. One is hidden away, and there has to be at least 1 more set in the other canoes. I encourage every canoe to have their own map set. I think that's really important. Take maps seriously. Don't take maps too seriously, because there's a lot of stuff that's not on maps. Another little story from Canoeing Wild Rivers. My first trip on the Hood River in the high Arctic. We came to a falls with a rapid leading into it. And the trip leader said, who I was not the trip leader then, he says, he sort of threw his paddle down in the canoe. It was very late in the day. He says, oh, we're gonna have to portage around this whole mess. It's about 3/4 of a mile. And I looked at my partner, Mark, and I said, hey, let's go ashore and look at this thing. At this, the leader just sort of hit the canoe with his fist, and he said, Cliff, look at the map. Look at it. You wrote a book on maps. There's no way we can get around this. I said, well, Bob, I'd like to look. Okay, he said, and he just sat there with an expression on his face. So Mark and I, we climbed up a ridge. Okay, not here, but just we climbed up this ridge, and we walked and walked, and we're looking down at the sheer, and we're saying, you know what? He's right. Bob's right. Doggone it, he's always right. And so we're about ready to turn back when we come to the falls. And then we noticed, hey, we could paddle all along the edge, get into there was a big eddy by the fall, get into this big eddy, haul up the hill, and just with maybe a 50, 75 foot carry, we're around the falls. So sometimes maps don't tell all. Okay, equip your canoe with spray covers, but don't take them too seriously. If you're going to use a cover, please put it on there as more for wind. Spray cover will cut your wind by close to half, actually, and it will keep you nice and warm and dry in the rain. But don't put a cover on there thinking, now I can run class 3-4 rapids in my loaded canoe. Yes, covers have saved my day and some very big stuff I've gotten into and didn't want to do. And never use my covers as an excuse for running a rapid. Don't overload your canoe. Well, you get the idea. Bring stuff to fix your boat. This was a broken seat on a folding canoe. This was broken along the Noatak River. Luckily, I had epoxy and fiberglass and wire, and we were able to put this thing back together again. Bring cozies for your pot, okay? So those of you who read my books, I'm a big fan of these books. Just a little background. This is an insulated band, okay? Everybody knows what a tea cozy is. You know, when I first started doing this thing, I was running trips for the Science Museum in Minnesota in northern Canada. And oftentimes, and I had a group of 10 people. Well, when you're cooking for a group of 10 people and you're starting with water whose temperature is probably 42 degrees, It takes an awful lot of fuel to bring water for spaghetti for 10 people or whatever it is to a boil. And I was blowing through gas really fast. So I had a buddy of mine who has a machine shop, and I had him make me a stand that holds 2 of those venerable old Optimus 111B stoves. Well, with 2 stoves cranking, I had no problem heating water. That's the good news. The bad news is I was sure going through a lot of gas. And then one day I was in a tea store and I saw a teapot with an insulated cover over it. And I said, hey, Grandma was right. As all we need to do is keep the heat in the pot. So I came up with this idea of a band that goes around and a cover, the cover is sitting down here in the foreground, that has another insulated pad on the top of it. So you just, everything in there, you close it up. As soon as the water gets to a boil, then you add the meat component or whatever is in danger of burning. In the case of spaghetti, you would add, you wait until it boils, you add the spaghetti or rice or whatever you're adding, put the cover on, take this thing off and set it on a closed cell foam pad. Then push this band down all the way to the bottom so it covers all the metal, cover the whole thing up, walk away for 20 minutes and everything will self-cook. You have saved a lot of stove fuel. How much? First trip I did on the Hood River was 21 days with 4 people. We did not have cozies. We went through 4 gallons of gasoline and we were very careful. We never used water. We never boiled water for dishes, for example. The second trip I did on the Hood was with a group of 10 people. It was a 17-day trip, if I remember, a 17 or 14-day trip. I don't remember which. I used a little over a gallon of fuel, like 1.25 gallons of fuel for that entire trip, because I never boiled water. I just brought it to a boil, cozied it up, and that was that. Okay. I even have cozies for my teapot. Isn't that cute? Another one of the other rules, stay away from navy blue. Navy blue is the most popular color for outdoor gear in the country, and it's also the worst because it attracts bugs. Now, these are all mosquitoes. You look here, here's a yellow bag. You see any on the yellow bag? No, it's the navy blue. Black is bad too. Other colors, doesn't seem to be much of a problem. Powder blue, no big problem, but navy blue is a problem. And one of Cliff's rules, don't carry anything on your chest. Yes, I know there are a lot of packs that have D-rings and things so that you can hang stuff on your chest. I will not permit it on my trips. There's a reason. If you can't see your feet, you're asking for trouble. You can't see your feet, you can sprain an ankle. You sprain an ankle, it's not your problem, it's our problem. If you want a double pack, learn to use a tump line. This is a tump line right here. Now, those who scoff at tump lines, I can tell you stories about tump lines, but I would say to you that every person in underdeveloped countries who carries loads carries it on their head. African women carry like half of their body weight on their heads. If you go to the Himalayas and you have a trip, those porters will take all your packs and stuff. They'll stick it in a wicker basket. They'll put a tump line on it and they'll trot right up the hill. If shoulder straps and hip belts work better, they would use them. They are smart people. Every voyager carried thousands of pounds of trade goods on a tump line. Yes, the voyagers knew all about hip belts and shoulder straps. The problem with tump lines that most people don't understand is that if they don't get it instantly, they're like the 8th graders I used to teach. They don't want to learn. The strap does not go on your forehead and pull your head, as people who have never used tump lines suggest. It goes on top of your head. The load is straight down. You feel no pain. Furthermore, it pulls the pack right snug up against your back. Walk uphill, the pack does not pull away. I found on my trips, if I take some time and teach people how to adjust a tump line, and often a half an inch either way makes a huge difference, 9 out of 10 people will hardly ever pick up a heavy pack without a tump line again. So I guess I would end this thing by saying, have fun. By the way, this is what my wife Susie termed wedding cake falls on the Kopka River in Ontario, just less than a day's drive from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Kopka is a wonderful river, one of the prettiest rivers within the tree line I've done. And it is well within anybody who's competent in class 2 and has good class 2 rapids and has good judgment. So have fun, have more fun, and have still more fun. And with that, I leave you all, and I wish you the very best. And get out and canoe, get out and paddle, and thank you so much for tuning in.
Cliff, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I haven't seen any questions pop up. Do you want to sit tight for just like a minute or two and see if anything comes in?
Sure.
All right, sounds great.
If anybody has any questions, we'll wait a minute or so. And if you, if you text in or whatever, I'll be happy to do that. There's one other thing while we're just waiting here for questions that I just want to add. I think one of the most important things that you can have on one of these trips is patience. Seriously, most people don't have patience. I got to be at a certain point at a certain time. My float plane's going to pick me up, that sort of thing. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble that way. I still remember the first time I did the Fond du Lac River in northern Saskatchewan. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and we were camped on a very nice campsite. The wind was blowing about 20 miles an hour upstream. You couldn't go anywhere. We'd stopped early in the day. And finally, at about 5 o'clock, we saw 2 canoes coming by, and we invited them in. We said, hey, camp with us. You guys, you can't go anywhere anyway. And I remember the guy said to me, no, Cliff, we got to keep going. We got to meet our float plane. We're already behind. I said, oh, okay, whatever. So they took off. The next morning we got up about 10. I think we got out about noon. And then I remember we went about a mile downstream and we passed their camp on River Right. They were still in their tents. They were still sleeping. They never passed us. So the rule really is, if the weather's bad, whatever, if there's a danger ahead, just stay put, okay? Run when you can, camp when you can't. And I would leave everybody with a final thought too. When you hear these inflated comments from some people like, oh, ours was a first descent. Yes, we were the first ones to do this river. You know what? That's nonsense. Go back 200 years, 300 years, all the native peoples went up and down these rivers with their wives and their children and their in-laws and their kids and their dogs, and they made it safely. And they weren't wearing life jackets, and they weren't particularly skilled paddlers. But why did they make it? Because they had good judgment. Oh, it's bad weather today. Oh, we'll just stay put. Now, if you can't do that, you don't belong on one of these northern rivers. And there seems to be an attitude today that, oh, I have a GPS, I have a satellite communicator, I have a satellite phone. If things go sour, I can call in and get a rescue. Yeah, good luck. And with that, I wish you all the best. And there you have it.